Hi everybody, I'm Saul Cross and you're listening to the Sim World podcast.
It's the Scene World podcast. My name is AJ, Joerg's name is Joerg.
Hi!
So today, in a minute, who are we talking to?
We are talking to Chris Bateman.
Chris Bateman. And
Yes, and he is known to have worked on Discworld games. Exactly 20 years ago.
Oh, okay. Cool. I missed this podcast. I was out on special assignment, but I'm here for the intro.
Nice.
Yeah. So before we do that, that's coming up in a minute. There's a Kickstarter, there's stuff, there's cool, it's awesome. Before we do that, we got some news and information.
For example, we have a press announcement from Corion, and they are actually working on a game that is called Alien Escape. And you have to think in 360 degrees that they write, because you have to turn it to actually surpass the level.
Turn what?
Well, the whole environment.
Oh. Okay.
So he's running and you are turning the environment meanwhile.
Interesting. That's different.
Yeah. And they write that Kim Seidner is the main developer of Nofel, and he's not only a programming enthusiast, he is also an incredible pixel artist, and he is doing the awesome animations with a lot of details for the game. And the game is getting to be released for spring, summer 2019 for PC and consoles, which means Nintendo Switch. More information about the development will come in the near future via Twitter and website.
Okay.
Yep. So there is more information about that on Corion.de.
Cool. I got some here. Project SidFX. We've talked about the SidFX before in the past.
Yeah.
There is a new batch available. It was just announced a couple of days ago, early March. So that's the good news. The bad news is that this might be the last batch of SidFXs made. So
Why?
it says that a key component used is no longer manufactured, and it's getting increasingly difficult to locate any on the market.
Ooh.
Last December, they were able to find a small number of the components and build the new batches. So if you want to get a SidFX, get it now, because this might be the last time you can. And I will heartily recommend the SidFX is awesome. I don't think that I could actually. I don't know. I don't think I could go back to not having one, just because the pseudo stereo just sounds so bitchin'.
Wow. Well, I still get to go the fix, so I should do that soon, I guess.
Yeah. So that's that. Now, what were you telling me about? You messaged me about individual computers.
Yes, they actually wrote on Amiga News that if this thing between Cloanto and obviously Hyperion cannot be resolved, then Jens Schoenfeld will be out of the Amiga business in 2020.
Now, this is... So I guess Cloanto recently just purchased more of the Amiga holdings. I guess they bought Amiga Inc. or something, and so now they're fighting Hyperion. The Amiga IP is a cluster of just competing people that are just sitting on copyrights and trying to stop other people from doing things, and it's annoying. And I can see how it would have an impact on Jens, because I mean the stuff he's putting out, like the ACA 500 has licensed Kickstart. 1.3 and 3.1 is included with it, as well as a full install of 3.1.
Well, he's making a living on the Amiga and Commodore 64 stuff. Without the Amiga, how he can keep running the hardware business?
Well, I mean, ultimately he could do sort of like what the Ultimate 64 did, where you just remove the ROMs. So it would be the ACA 500 plus, but without the kickstarts built in and without the OS kick built in. So you'd still have to get them from someplace else. But again, I think that he has licensing agreements with Hyperion. So theoretically, if Hyperion loses the lawsuit, then Cloanto could go after Individual, unless he turns around and signs some kind of, unless he agrees to their terms, which their terms might be ridiculous. So it's not looking very bright for the Amiga.
Well, you mentioned the Ultimate 64, and that's a C64 replacement.
Right. Which again, because of Cloanto, had to remove the ROMs because they currently own the copyright for the ROMs. So now it's a dead board that you have to put your own ROMs on. But Cloanto is, there's lots of competing back and forth on who's in the wrong and everything. But I see Cloanto doing a lot less with the IP than I see everyone else doing. Like Hyperion just released 314. I actually have it. I put it on. My A500 has 314 in it.
Well, they are known for the Amiga forever and C64 forever.
Right, but all that is an emulation package. It's a CD full or a DVD full of software, and you just run it, and that's it. They're not actually making new stuff. They're not pushing the platform forward. They're just sort of cashing in on what already exists, if that makes any sense. And trying to stop other people from doing other things, like Hyperion put out 314, and Cloanto immediately tried to stop them, which just seems unnecessarily litigious. Litigious, is that a word? Litigious? Litigious.
If you don't know it.
Litigious. Litigious is the word. God, I'm terrible. Yeah, it just seems unnecessarily litigious, and I don't know. It just the future of Amiga doesn't look bright outside of like the indie scene, like the independent developers that are doing stuff. As far as hardware goes and software for like the OS and everything, it feels like it's just hit a dead end with these companies that are just fighting each other for control of the IPs.
But Darren Mayburn made a deal with Cloanto back then. He used it for the C64 Mini. Right. I mean, Cloanto is mentioned on the box, so looks like there is a way to not have ridiculous agreement.
Yeah. Well, but again, you don't know what that deal is with Cloanto. Cloanto could be getting a cut of every freaking version of every sale of the 64 Mini. 20% could be going to Cloanto. Which maybe for something like that is all right, but for a smaller operator like Individual, that's going to be a huge chunk of your profits.
Well, Darren Mayburn, is he small? Is Retro Games small? I don't know.
I don't think it's pretty small. I don't think it's small. I mean, they're in stores. They're here. I've seen them in stores. That's a significant. That's okay. a decently sized operation, I would imagine, because you're not going to have distribution like that. From a small company. Whereas I don't know what the size of the team at Individual Computers is. I feel like it's probably just Jens and like two other people.
No. He has more people working for him.
Yeah, I know he's got more people, but it's not like 100 employee company here. It's a small company. So they probably can't afford to cut 20% of their profits to give to Cloanto. But we'll see. We'll see how that works. Hopefully this whole thing gets resolved and not in a stupid way.
Last bit of news I have.
Yes.
So, Walter Day announced there will be a birthday party for 70th birthday in the Museum of Pinball of John Weeks Legendary in Banning, California on Saturday, May 18th.
Ooh, are we invited?
It's a free party. Everyone is invited.
Oh, okay.
For free ice cream, cake, and so on.
Okay.
Old Schooler Game Magazine and the soon-to-be-announced sponsor will be joining me in conducting a major trading card ceremony. that will see nearly 100 new trading cards unveiled. With the trading card award presented in golden frames.
Do I get my card yet?
Well, ask him. Yeah.
Pretty sure he has no idea who I am. That's okay.
Well, no. He saw the promotion only interview.
Yeah. So if you happen to be in Banning, California, and happen to be walking by the John Weeks Legendary Museum of Pinball on May 18th, then hey, swing by, hang out for Walter Day's 70th birthday.
I just sent you a link to the announcement via WhatsApp.
I'm reading it right now.
Great.
Parties from 4 p.m. till closing. So if you're there, go play some pinball, hang out with Walter Day, I guess.
Yeah, important is trading card ceremonies will be at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Following by a group photo.
Of all the people who have ever appeared on a trading card. So it's a group photo of people on trading cards.
Yep.
That are there.
Yep.
So awesome. So check that out if you're there.
Yep. That would be all the news I'm having.
That's about all I got. So
wonderful.
So Chris Bateman is hanging out, waiting for us to get to him. So let's go and talk to him and find out about Silk.
Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Today we are talking to Chris Bateman, and you are mainly known for having worked on the Discworld games, at least 2 of them, from what I saw.
Yes, right at the beginning of my career, I was at Perfect Entertainment, who made the Discworld games. I joined a little after the first game, but Discworld 2 was pretty much the first video game that I worked on professionally. And then Discworld Noir, which was the third of them, was my first game as a lead designer and as a lead writer, which was really being thrown in at the deep end.
And that was exactly 20 years ago, if Mobby Games is right.
It came out in 1999, so that is 20 years ago since release, yes. I mean, we started work on that several years before that. I had a lot of time. I had almost a year there where I did almost nothing but read Discworld novels and watch film noir movies. And read hard-boiled detective stories like Raymond Chandler and so forth. So there was a good year there where my job was basically to do research, which is not that taxing actually compared to other jobs I've done since.
Okay, so let me ask you, how did you actually start into, I would say, game designing?
Yes.
And how did that happen?
Well, the brutal truth is, what I really wanted to do was make tabletop role-playing games. But then along came Magic the Gathering, and that sort of knocked the bottom out of the market for tabletop role-playing games, and it became apparent I wasn't going to be able to do that anymore. I ended up working in video games instead. I've always liked games, tabletop games and video games, and quite happy to work on either set of projects. But it was video games that was there when I needed them to work on. So that's how I ended up going down that path. Okay.
So how did you get in touch with role-playing games in general and adventure games? Because that is what we will talk about now with your latest game. So how did that happen?
How did I get into role-playing games?
Yes.
Well, I don't know if my sister will appreciate me telling this story, but she had an admirer at school who was a Dungeons and Dragons player, and he bizarrely gave her a copy of the 1981 basic D&D set, which she had no use for whatsoever, and so gave it straight to me. And I started playing that with my friends, and very quickly started playing all sorts of classic games, things like Car Wars, which is a tabletop battle system by Steve Jackson, and just about every tabletop role-playing game there was, and the computer video game versions as well. I mean, spent a lot of time mapping Bard's Tale back in the day. All my friends came round to play Bard's Tale on my Atari ST because I'd already mapped the whole thing, and they used my maps to complete it. So I've been playing role-playing games pretty much since, when did that mean? Since 1981, since I was 9, I think.
Yeah, I guess Bard's Tale was 85, if I'm
that's
not
right.
mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think I had played computer role-playing games before Bard's Tale, but that's the one that really stuck in my head from there. That was a really memorable moment in the role-playing games life. And I've ended up working on quite a few role-playing games since, because I worked with some Slovakian clients of ours to make the Heretic Kingdoms role-playing games. The latest one of those, Shadows Awakening, is out at the moment for most platforms.
Interesting. So, for your latest game, you decided to go for Kickstarter, and that is actually called Silk. Yes.
So I was very divided on this question about whether to go for a Kickstarter on this, but we're in the process of setting up a game developer. My company, International Hobo, is a services company. We provide game design and narrative design services to other companies, and I've been doing that since I left Perfect Entertainment, since I worked on the Discworld games, more or less. But we mostly don't make our own games. We mostly help other people make their games. And this last year, we just started putting 2 teams together to make games. And the first of those that will be finished is Silk. The thing is, I looked at Silk and thought, this is a pretty esoteric project. This is a project we're going to need some help finding the players who want to play this style of game. And largely my thinking about the Kickstarter was running the Kickstarter will help us find the players who want to play this kind of game. So whatever happens with the Kickstarter, it's as much about us finding an audience who's interested in a retro explorer game as anything else. It takes a certain kind of person to want to play this kind of game, and I hope they're out there. So far, so good with the Kickstarter.
Well, we spoke to a lot of designers who kickstarted their games, and from what I gathered is, since David Crane failed with his years ago, game companies and designers were a bit hesitating in going at Kickstarters as well. So
I think the thing is, the golden age of Kickstarter is already behind us, right? So a few years back, everything was going down the Kickstarter route, but now it's actually quite difficult to succeed in a Kickstarter. Most magazines, most websites aren't interested in covering games that are funding themselves via Kickstarter, so it's very difficult to get noticed coming down that line. And I think a lot of people who were backers before have been burnt by it, and so are a little bit nervous about backing projects now. For us, the thing is, we have to go and get publishing partners, because we're sticking Silk on Switch, PS4 and Xbox One. To do that, we will need a publishing partner. But getting the money from the Kickstarter gets us over the hump with things we need, like the portraits for the characters in the game, which are a real stumbling block, because my core team can't deliver them. We have to go to Becky, who is our portrait artist, and we needed some help to do that, and that's why we went to the Kickstarter. But ultimately, we still have to go to a publisher if we're going to ship the game. The money we're raising at Kickstarter isn't enough to get it onto all of the platforms, if you see what I mean.
That is what everybody does.
Yeah.
Basically. I played the demo a bit, and I found the graphic style of the game is pretty unique.
Yes.
It's more like a cartoonic thing. And as you mentioned the Switch, I even wonder if that will look so great on the Switch in a way, because when I was talking to game designers, most of them were telling me the problem is to shrink down the game size and the graphic quality to make games run fluid, or being small enough for a game card.
Yes. Well, we actually, Switch is the one platform we have a lead on, because we already actually have the demo running on Switch at the moment, and it runs pretty well. Actually, it's quite well suited to it. The engine's very lightweight. I mean, the engine is modeled on Mike Singleton's original landscaping engine for the 1984 Lords of Midnight, which was the game that sort of inspired me to pursue this project. I really wanted to do a tribute game to Lords of Midnight, and I felt like if I didn't do it now, I'd never do it. So do it now while people who remember Lords of Midnight are still alive. That's the plan there, really. It seems to run on Switch fine. I haven't had a chance to play it myself, but I will do on Tuesday this week, and we hope to be taking some video footage of the game running on Switch, which is very exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing the game on the Switch, because it was the platform we really wanted to get it on in the first place.
So let's talk a bit about what has Silk to offer. We mentioned now the special graphic style, and what else is there gameplay wise? What can people expect? I have to give you a little bit of background. The last role-playing game I played was No Name in 2001 for the Commodore 64, and then I basically didn't touch the role-playing genre so much ever since.
Right. Okay. So you're still enjoying the classics, Joerg. Yes.
Yeah. That's right.
So Silk sets you in 200 AD in the lands between the Roman Empire and Three Kingdoms China, and you choose one of four heroic destinies: either to travel the Silk Road, or to build a trading empire, or to overthrow the Parthian Empire, who are bitter rivals of the Romans, or to come in as the warlord and to take over the imperial mints. And basically, you either play towards a military endgame, or you play towards some kind of commercial or travel endgame. So you recruit a party of advisors. There are advisors generated for all the different cultures on the Silk Road, and they have different skills. You add them to your party, and then you take that party across the Silk Road, trying to survive bandit attacks and keep your camels and horses going between settlements, basically. So it's part wilderness survivor, part exploration, part battle game, part trading game. It's a bit like Elite, but in 200 AD.
I actually saw the promo video, and you mentioned especially Elite.
Yeah, no, see, I didn't set off to make Elite. We set off trying to look at what we could do with the Lords of Midnight concept. But once we decided to try and set it in 200 AD, it became inevitable that the game would be partly about running trading caravans, and that makes it feel a little bit like Elite with camels, right? So in Elite, you would buy different things to allow you to do this. You'd buy mining lasers and fuel scoops and be an asteroid miner, or you would buy better weapons and go out and collect bounties, or go pirate and attack other starships and steal their cargo. And we have kind of the same thing going on here. You can use the resources you've got to get guards and horses, and use those to take over settlements and get tribute from those settlements, or attack caravans, if you like. You could turn pirate by land, turn brigand, and go and attack other caravans. Or you can be more honest about it. You can build a large caravan of camels and run trade east or west, and there are different goods that sell better moving east or west. So silk, for instance, which starts in China, gets more valuable the more westward that you carry it. Trouble is, the closer you get to the Roman territory, the more of a war zone it is that you're trying to cross, because the Parthians and the Romans have been at war for decades at this point, and it's just an absolute disaster area over in Mesopotamia, as it was in 200 AD, so it is now pretty much. That whole area, Iraq and Iran, pretty much been at war for two millennia now. But we'll take you right back to the beginning of that conflict with this bitter rivalry between the Roman Empire and the Parthians.
Interestingly, a few years back, media wrote that games that need a lot of involvement in stories, like role-playing games or real-time strategy games, are a dying genre, like Command and Conquer, which has hours of gameplay and so on. And now there seems to be a bit of a revival, and those kinds of games appear to come back. So I guess when you said now is the right time to make a game like Silk, that is probably coined on the retro and the revival of old genres.
Yeah, no. So I think the thing is, every now and then, it looks like some particular part of the games industry is taking over from everything else. I mean, in the 90s, it was point-and-click adventures. It wasn't a coincidence that I was working on point-and-click adventures in the 90s. They were huge then, right? LucasArts made point-and-click adventures look like the future of video games. But then
Adventuresoft in UK. Times of Sorcerer and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yes, not Magnetic Scrolls as well. My boss Angela Sutherland worked for Firebird, BT's company, and so had a hand in the Magnetic Scrolls adventure games. So there was this point where those adventure games, and particularly the point-and-click adventures in the 90s, were the sort of the top of the market. But then along comes Doom and Quake, and all of a sudden everything's moving in a completely different direction overnight. Not to mention Super Mario 64, which sets off all of the platform games. So it comes in swings and roundabouts, right? The video games industry is always focusing on one kind of thing or another, and at the top end at the moment we've got a lot of focus on still open world games still doing well in various different forms, but also, of course, battle royale games at the top end of the market. But elsewhere, we're seeing lots of styles of games that have not been made for a while coming back. I mean, look at The Escapists. The Escapists is basically an incredibly late sequel to School Days and Back to School on the ZX Spectrum. There's this real sense of classic forms coming back, and we mentioned Elite. Obviously, we've got Elite Dangerous now, which is had a fairly large gap between that and the previous Elite sequel, to say the least. I think there is now more of an appetite for looking at things that we had in the past and finding new ways to make them work today. And I thought it'd be really nice to see if I can make one of those exploration adventures work for a contemporary audience, and that's what I'm experimenting with in Silk.
You mentioned Switch being the primary platform, and that's pretty interesting because each year I'm having a booth with my team at Gamescom in the retro area, and we also make interviews in the business area. And when I was talking to game developers and publishers 2 years ago at Gamescom, people were like, Switch, we will see what other people are doing. The hardware is not strong enough. And then last year, Bethesda came up and a Panic Button made a version of Doom, which seemed to be impossible. And then a year later, they make Wolfenstein 2, which was also meant to be impossible. And suddenly all game publishers and developers are jumping on a Switch platform and say, okay, we will do a Switch platform release and it will be good. So I wonder what changed there, or what was the reason you decided that Switch is one of your platforms that you will support?
Okay, so there's two things here. One is why the Switch was so successful at taking off. And I think it's the fact that, yes, it's a home console. And yes, as a home console, it's not as powerful as the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One. But you would also pick it up, carry it, play it wherever you like. And that is a huge thing that you just don't do with other home consoles. And if there's one thing we've learned over the last 2 years, it's that gamers are more than willing to put up with a little drop in the graphics quality or the performance if it means they can play it anywhere. And that's the appeal of the Switch. And I really felt in the early days of working on Silk, because we did look about whether or not to do it for mobiles, because that was also a route that we could have done. But the more we looked at it, we thought, do you know what? Switch would just be a really great platform to have this in. I mean, don't get me wrong, it'll run on all the platforms. And obviously you've seen the PC demo, I'm thinking. Yeah. So it'll run on all platforms, and it runs perfectly fine on the PC. But there's something about this kind of exploration adventure that I think would work really nicely as a portable game, as a game that you could take around with you and just dip into when you fancied a bit of exploring the vast landscape between Rome and China.
Interesting. So what's your approach? What are the other team members? Do you have anything special coming up, like a special kind of music, something doing something in the game that wasn't done before, something groundbreaking?
Something groundbreaking. Well, for me, the most groundbreaking aspect of this project is that it's taking an engine design from 1984 and presenting it with contemporary tech. And I think that is not the way any sane person makes a video game. But it's what I wanted to do. I wanted to come in with that landscape engine that had been used in Lords of Midnight. And I wanted to see what we could do with it as a contemporary game. And so groundbreaking, no, but different, yes, right? It's not like I'm doing something that hasn't been done before, because it was done in 1984. But nobody's seen a game put together quite like this. And it's got a lot of those qualities that make the exploring games of the 80s appealing, but it's also got a little bit more legs because it's a little bit more contemporary. So, for instance, the advisors have quite a lot of dialogue that would just not have fitted into a Spectrum or a Commodore 64. There wasn't enough memory. But the advisors have lots of different things to say to advise you while you're traveling around. And there's quite a lot of charm to some of the things that they say in response to the stuff that's going around. I think it's a really interesting piece, and I've been really enjoying working on it, and I really would rather just be working on it rather than having to go around promote it, to be quite honest, which I think is something that many game developers feel. So I want to be working on the project rather than having to tell people about it. But if we don't tell people about it, no one's going to find it.
I mean, look at people like Ron Gilbert.
Yeah,
he has done more interviews for his latest adventure game, Thimbleweed Park, than he ever did before. So, well, I guess that's just part of the progress. And why I'm asking if there's something new compared to back then is, I remember when I was talking to Ron Gilbert, he said we made the same pixel graphics, but we added pixel shader technology that wouldn't be possible before. So you mentioned that it's basically more text and more conversation.
Yeah, certainly compared to games from 1984, because you only had 64K or whatever to work with, so it was very difficult to have a great deal of text at the time. But we've got actually a scripting engine which is very similar to King of Dragon Pass from 1999. That team, of course, have their own game out. They've got 6 Ages kicking around at the moment. But I really liked their scripting engine. I really liked the way that they had the clan ring provide advice to the player about what to do in King of Dragon Pass. And I looked at that system really closely and thought, do you know what? That system is good enough that it doesn't have to just give you advice. We could make a whole role-playing game around this system of having dialogue triggered according to the circumstances the player faces. So a large part of the play of Silk is listening to your advisors suggest ways to react to the current situation and making the best choice you can from the situation. And depending on your advisors, you might have a lot of good choices, or you might have no good choices in a situation. It's a matter of how you built your party and what kind of situations you then end up encountering. And even though I wrote all of the dialogue myself, I'm still finding stuff come out of the advisors from time to time, which gives me a chuckle because I'm not expecting them to say various things that just come out at random. It rather tickles me.
So there's some kind of artificial intelligence engine in it. If they say things you wouldn't expect either.
I have a background in AI, but don't be fooled by artificial intelligence. Computers are actually pretty stupid at most of the things that they do. But the thing is, there's a whole set of logical conditions that determine when dialogue will trigger. But when you're constructing those conditions, you don't always think of all of the ways that could actually happen in practice. And this happened to me with Discworld Noir as well, because that was also a project where I had a scripting language and I created dialogue to refer to particular cases, but I didn't always know the circumstances that those cases would come up. So when journalists were telling me how they'd completed certain puzzles in Discworld Noir, some of them told me ways to solve puzzles that I hadn't even realized were possible because I had just created all of the relevant contexts and cases, but I couldn't possibly look at all of the ways that they could be combined. And Silk has this same quality whereby, yeah, I wrote all the lines of dialogue and programmed the logic for triggering it, but even I don't know the circumstances that they'll come out in practice. And I find it very entertaining watching some of my characters in the party make snide remarks at the terrible decisions I'm making in the game.
I wonder, do you actually plan to only target on those players, retro players that remember the old role-playing games? Or is there also something that you put inside to approach youngsters like 20-something that have nothing in background with these old games? I mean myself, I'm one of the last generation that actually still knows the old games. But people younger than me probably don't.
I know. I think you're absolutely right, and that's why I felt if I was going to do a tribute to Lords of Midnight, it has to be now, because I feel like, you know, the generation that remember us that we're getting on, shall we say, and many of us did not take good care of ourselves when we were younger. So I felt now was a good time to roll in on that. But I'm certainly hoping that this is a game that younger players will also play and enjoy. I don't think you need to have played the games that I'm riffing off to enjoy the experience it gives you. You just have to be open to this style of play, which is part exploration and part adventure, and if you want it to be, part strategy game as well. It's I think because there are no other games that play in quite this way, that I'm hoping that a younger audience, once they encounter it, will find something new and different here that they'll want to engage with, and maybe also learn a little something about the history of games in the process. But I'll be happy if they find it and play it, to be quite honest.
Well, it's interesting. I spoke to a couple of developers, and one platform that has always have a look on is Metacritics, and it's interesting because a lot of those niche games, if you look at the media, how they respond to niche games, for example, Red Rogers, who is the successor of Commander Keen, and you would see a lot of journalists who played the old games of the 80s and 90s loving the new game, and the ones that are 20-something and never played the old game saying, don't really know it. So they are quite happy sometimes if they are in the middle range, like neither bad ratings nor good ratings. And I always wondered as a player myself, if that is really a goal you would go after. I'm not sure. I think just wondering.
The thing with Metacritic is Metacritic's terribly important for the big expensive games, right? If you spent 50 million making your game and you don't get your desired 90% on Metacritic, like Anthem recently, which pulled in a 60 on Metacritic, that's a disaster for them, right? Because they spent a fortune on it and they needed those big scores. But if you're putting together a project on, I don't know, €100,000 or whatever it is, if it's a small project, Metacritic, if you even get listed on Metacritic, you've succeeded, right? If you get enough reviews that you can appear on Metacritic, you've succeeded regardless of what the numbers are. So it's a very different prospect when you're working on these small indie titles than when you're working on the big titles. And one of the things that's been fun about my career is I get to do a bit of both, because I work for other people's projects. I get to work on big stuff. I mean, we've been working on the back end of Tropico 6 at the moment, which is imminent, and so it's total chaos on that project for my team at the moment, because we're trying to do that and everything else and be ready for GDC in just a little over a week now. But yeah, you get to see a little bit of everything. You get to see how the bigger projects work, and you get to work on the smaller projects as well, and that's pretty sweet, actually. I really like working on different scales of projects, and there's a charm to these small indie projects that they have a little bit more freedom to be unique, I think, than some of the bigger projects.
Is it easier for well, a developer like yourself with a rather big name, known name, to find a publisher?
Well, I'd firstly have to disabuse you of the notion that I have a big name. The thing is, there are many, many game designers who have a lot more traction with publishers than I do. I mean, I've been lucky that I got to work on some successful games, which is great. But it's not like I can walk into a publisher and demand that they fill a bowl full of M&Ms for me. It's much more a matter of just going and meeting with the publishers and trying to find the ones who are interested in the kind of project that we're doing and the scale that we're working on. I've actually got two. I can't talk about the other projects; it's not been announced yet. But I've got two projects, Silk and one other one that we're developing with the team here in Manchester that I'm taking up to GDC, and It's going to be heavy going. People, I think it's glamorous to go off to San Francisco to TDC, but for me, I'm facing 3 days of back-to-back meetings, and it's it's a bit daunting at the moment. But it's just what we got to do, right? We got to go out there and we got to show the publishers what we're doing and see who's interested in what we're doing.
I guess we are quite successful with Silk so far. I mean, I looked at it right now, and it's like halfway through, and there are still about 3 weeks left. That's looking very promising.
Yeah, we got a good start out there, but you can never count your chickens with Kickstarter, is the thing. It's... Oh, geez, we've looked at the profiles of previous Kickstarters, and I would have felt much happier if we'd just raised all of our money already and we could be done. But obviously, we've still got weeks to go. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to share some of what goes down at GDC while I'm trying to sell Silk to the publishers. And I'm trying to be open to the backers at the moment, because they keep asking me questions like, will it be moddable and will there be a DRM-free version? And I have to come back and say, we'd like to do these things, but it really depends on the publisher, because if the publisher doesn't want to offer a DRM-free PC version, then we're going to be in an awkward situation, because it'll be very difficult to get it on all the platforms we want if we don't have the publisher to back us. So, yeah, I'm hoping to offer a fully moddable DRM-free PC version, but I don't know until... we get a few more of the meetings under our belt, unfortunately. And that's been, I think, one of the most uncomfortable things about trying to do this is running the Kickstarter right during this time where we also have to go to GDC and make deals with the publishers means that I can't properly answer everybody's question. I do the best I can with the information we've got, but we don't know yet. We have to wait to see how things turn out. But it's certainly an exciting time for the project and for the new development team that we set up.
So let's go back a bit to Silk itself. Well, so are there any other developers or people involved in the team that work on the game that are known from other games that people would say, okay, I have heard that name before?
Well, if you're a retro head, then you may well have heard of Huey Games. Huey, who stuck out Hyper Sentinel and are shipping Woolly Mountain at the moment, which is a point and click. They have pretty much decided to pursue these neo-retro style games, and they are also based in Manchester and good friends of ours, and so we got them involved. So they've helped us run the Kickstarter because they'd already had some experience running Kickstarters, and they're also helping us on the porting on the back end because they've got prior experience working on it. So this is why we've already got it running on the Switch, basically, because we've got a leg up because Huey was there to help us. It's been really good fun working with them. Really nice people. John and Rob from Huey Games, just really nice, genuine people with a great love of video games and a great love of retro games. And if you know of Uridium and you haven't seen Hyper Sentinel yet, then you have totally missed a trick, and you need to go out and get that straight away.
That's actually true. They're actually pretty much known for the older generation about Husen, actually. That is where they are derived from.
Well, this is it. That's why they're called Huey, because Rob Hewson is Andrew Hewson's son, and Andrew Hewson, who run Hewson Consultants, is an advisor and an investor in Huey's operation. So they have this great history going back to all of these classic Hewson Consultant games. And as Commodore 64 fans, obviously we know Hewson Consultants particularly well because some of the greatest games on the Commodore 64, Paradroid, which is probably my favorite game of the 20th century, obviously developed by Graphgold and published by Hewson Consultants, and just an absolutely astonishing piece of game design. That I worked with Graphgold briefly in their latter days, and I got to meet Andrew Braybook, who was my hero, but it was largely just having a pint with him in a pub near their offices, and I doubt he even remembers meeting me, sadly, which is so often the way these things go down, sadly. But yeah, Hewson Consultants, just an astonishing library that they shipped for those old platforms, and justifiably remembered as a source of great games.
So let's talk a bit about the perks you are planning for the Kickstarter. I saw you are actually offering a USB shaped tape, for example.
Absolutely, yes. It's a USB that is in a cassette box and cassette housing, and I figure if you are a retro games collector, then you probably wouldn't mind having a few more cassettes that you can add to your collection. And so that's one of the backer awards we've offered, are these retro 80s style cassettes, which are really cute little things. And it gives me a smile every time to flip open a cassette box and think that you could still flip open a cassette box and find a game inside, and not have to load it from tape. That's all the retro nostalgia and none of the horror of sitting there for 30 minutes while it loads from tape and then doesn't complete and sits at the end without actually running. True. We've all been there, right? We've all been there. Everyone who had a Spectrum or a Commodore 64 has had that horrific experience of getting to the end of the tape and it didn't load, and you've got to load it again. Well, you won't have that problem with USB anyway.
I wonder.
Go on.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wonder if, as to say, Switch as a platform, I didn't see a physical Switch perk I could have backed on. Or did I miss something?
No. You see, decided not to do any specific ones for the platforms because we had no idea what the proportion of the backers would want as their platform. So we tried to set it up in such a way that it would work for everybody. I didn't want to favour the Switch owners over everyone else, because I really didn't know what proportion of platforms players would want. And I think I still don't know, because even the backer information we've got doesn't yet tell us which platform they want it on. We'll have to wait until the Kickstarter is over and then run a survey, and then only then will we know what platform people actually want to play it on. But yeah, I know that we do have some Switch fans in it, but I know also we've got some PC and Mac and even some Linux players who are very excited that the game is going to run on Linux as well, because the poor Linux players don't get many releases, not as many as they'd like anyway.
I saw you're using Unity, at least when I checked the demo. So I guess that makes it easier to convert it to all the platforms.
Yeah, game developers who are starting their career now have no idea how good they've got it with tools like Unity to use. When I look back to what game development was like in the early days of my career and compare it to what we can now do on Unity, and it's just shocking how much help you can now get. Unity makes shipping to these different platforms so much easier than it ever was before. Don't get me wrong, there's still a fair bit of work in getting it onto the different platforms, but having a solid engine that will run on all of those platforms and is set up to deal with that in the first place makes life 1,000 times easier. I'm just, you've no idea if you're only starting in game development now just how good you've got it in terms of the tools that are available now. It's really quite amazing and really great to work with, and to the extent that I'm doing stuff with Unity that I've never done on any project previously. I've been messing around with sprites and audio, and I've never really got my hands wet with this on projects I've worked on before, but it's easy enough to do, and I find it difficult to then not not just every now and then think, well, we need some placeholder sound effects, so I'll record something and I'll drop it into the game, and then we'll hear what it sounds like. So it's been a really enjoyable development process, and Unity is a part of what makes that enjoyable.
So I guess most people who backed the Kickstarter are wondering what's happening after Kickstarter. What's your timetable, your planning?
Right. So this is another one that depends on how the deals go at GDC. But we are hoping to complete the core game in about 7 months from here. So with luck, the core game will be finished this year. And then it is just a matter of how long it takes to get it ported and passed on the different platforms and then shipped, which I'm suspecting will not fit into this year. And to be realistic, no publisher wants to release in the Christmas period, because all the big games are fighting to the death in their own battle royale in November and December. So no publisher wants to launch smaller titles in that particular bloodbath. So it's likely that we'll be shipping it in early 2020 in practice, even though the game should be finished sometime this year. I say all this, but this is game development, and every time you try and predict what's going to happen in the future in game development, you get it wrong. But we hit alpha ahead of schedule. We were able to have more features in the Kickstarter demo than were planned for the Kickstarter demo, which was great news. And in general, I think we've made very good headway on the project. And the main thing holding us up now is things like the portrait art, because we don't quite have enough resources to get that. So we need help from the Kickstarter backers, or help from the publishers, or a little bit of both. To make ends meet. It's the trouble from having chosen an element of the game that we can't actually fulfill with our own team. But I love the art that Becky's done for the portraits. And have you seen that some of these portraits are actually based on photographs? So one of the other rewards we're offering for the Kickstarter is to get yourself in the game. And so the main members of the team, we've all been converted into portraits for different advisors in the game, and it was tremendous fun seeing, for instance, Jamie, the landscape artist, converted into basically a Three Kingdoms cowboy, basically this badass rider from the Three Kingdoms area, and it's been a lot of fun watching Becky take our photos and turn them into advisors, and that's one of the things that we're offering as a backer award, is to get yourself into the game.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any backup plan in case the Kickstarter doesn't turn out the way you hope it?
Yes. So the thing is, with pursuing a Kickstarter, as I said before, the Golden Age of Kickstarter has passed. So it is possible that we will get that heartbreaking thing where we fall just shy of the target and don't get the funds through. But that won't be the end of the project. It is simply a matter then of what the deals that we were able to make with the publishers at GDC. So the way publishing tends to work these days is that there's a split in the funds, and the developer pays some of the development and the publisher spends some on the development. So there's every chance we can still deliver, but I suspect if we don't succeed in the Kickstarter, it will slow the project down slightly. It might take a little bit longer, because we will need to then make the deal with the publisher before we can get all of the portraits made, and that's going to create a delay. So yes to the backup plan, but the downside of that is if we don't succeed in the Kickstarter, it will probably add a couple of months onto the project, which will be awkward, but that's game development, right? You roll with the punches.
And you are not planning on restarting it? Because I know that some games actually did that, or some computer game projects. For example, Dave Lowe, who did his remastered computer game audio release, he actually had to do it two times, because he fell short of 93% fulfilled and 7 were missing. So he had to run it again. And then, of course, he succeeded, I just wonder, because personally as a backer, I experienced that sometimes publishers give up and then it's not happening anymore. And I find that always a sad result in a way.
Yeah, nobody wants to get emotionally involved in a project that isn't going to see itself through. I haven't ruled out running the Kickstarter a second time, particularly if it's obvious that we only fell slightly short and that starting again would give us an excellent chance of succeeding. And partly, I think if we did fall short of the Kickstarter, I'd be very tempted to run it again because I really want to get more people turned into advisors in the game because it's really good fun, and I want to let anybody who's up for that have a shot at going through the process. But it's not a decision I can make yet. Basically, we just have to see how the situation progresses. The real problem is running the Kickstarter is a lot of work. Right, so it's already quite a lot of work doing the consultancy commitments I've got and working on the 2 projects we've got in development at the moment. So I won't rule it out, and certainly if we came very close, I think it would be a shame not to run the campaign again. But at the same time, I just don't know how things are going to go. I need to survive this trip to San Francisco. Really, this is my crossing of the Rubicon. If I can come back from San Francisco and still be able to breathe a sigh of relief on the far side, that's good enough for me. And then when we get through that, we can work out what to do next. But if you have already backed this project and you want to see it succeed, then stick with us, because one way or another we will be taking this forward. If we have to run the Kickstarter twice, so be it. But it's a lot of work. As anybody who's had a go at it will know, it's surprising how much time and effort you have to put in just to make the Kickstarter, just to make it roll forward.
Considering it's going all well and it's succeeding, are you planning to appear at Gamescom too?
Oh, I'm always at Gamescom. I used to be at GDC every year. Back in the noughties, I went to GDC every year because I was involved in the IGDA, and I set up their writing special interest group for them. But then there was all sorts of kerfuffle over the IGDA, and it changed at the top, and myself and many other people from my generation sort of left them to it. And then I started going to Gamescom instead. So I'll definitely be in Cologne. Although I must confess to missing Leipzig. I kind of liked Leipzig. I know it was a lot smaller there, but it's a nice town. And Cologne seems a little bit too big. They're pushing up on the size of E3 now, and E3 is too big for its own boots, frankly. But I'll definitely be in Gamescom, and with luck, we'll be in Gamescom and be able to show the game at beta at that point if everything goes to plan.
Probably in the indie area, I guess.
Yeah. I haven't worked out any details yet because we're still trying to get everything sorted for GDC, and we've got Develop afterwards because here in the UK we've got Develop in Brighton, which is a ton of fun. Susan Marshall runs that, and she ran the GDCs when I went to GDC, and she's really good events organizer. So we like to do Develop as well. So there's a lot of stages between here and Gamescom, but we will be out there, and we will have the game to show.
So certainly we should meet up, because we always do interviews about retro IPs or IPs that are coined on retro or retro successor games. So we certainly should meet up then. I
would love to meet up with you at Gamescom, and by that point I should also be able to show you one of the other projects we're working on, which also has a retro vibe, but it's very different. It's nothing like Silk at all, but there's still a little of 1984 in the other game as well. 1984, I'm starting to realize, is the year where some of the most awesome things ever made were made.
I have to admit, I'm always a bit surprised that at Gamescom I see very little retro publishing actually doing interviews with guys like you, and I'm wondering why that is. Mostly I see like modern media, but I don't think I ever saw Retro Gamer UK, which is like the #1 magazine for retro, conducting interviews at Gamescom business area. But maybe I'm just blind, but I never saw it.
I don't think I've seen it either. I don't know how they go about stuff. I've had articles. I've been interviewed over email for stuff on Retro Gamer several times. But honestly, I think the thing is, something like Gamescom, there is so much going on that you can't possibly do everything, right? So I think the interview schedules probably just get filled up, and that's about the size of it, to be quite honest. There's only so many hours in the day, and there are so many projects at Gamescom. It's so huge now. It really is getting to be the largest video. I mean, there's E3, of course, but E3 is rubbish. Let me tell you now, E3 is horrible. E3 is loud and obnoxious, and nowhere near as fun as Gamescom. Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't make this part of the recording then. But it's funny. Oh well, I'm sorry we lost a bit of track here, but it was just interesting.
The best conversations go off track, right?
Right.
What's the point of having a chat if you can't go off on wild tangents? It's half the fun of it.
Well, I didn't know how much time you have, but I like to do my interviews long and to cover all the aspects of what the person is doing and what he's trying to achieve with it. Especially since nowadays the interviews are mostly 15 minutes and they are all asked the same questions.
Well, I probably didn't have an hour to spend on this, but I did anyway, so that's fair enough. No, It's been a pleasure talking to you. I never tire of talking about the old games, and it's really been fun for me to find excuses to take my love of classic games and try and make newer style games that riff on them in interesting ways. And I think that's, as a game designer, it's something that I always like to do, is to pay tribute to the games that inspired me and to find ways to not make it again, but to look at the things I loved about those games and find new ways to bring them into games for today. I think there's something really special about having the opportunity to do that, and it's something I really enjoy doing. I can't believe that I've had this opportunity to take some of my influences from my childhood and turn them into what we hope is going to be successful commercial projects. That's really wonderful.
Well, if you look at old game designs and old stuff, I mean, some people are really old by now. I mean, for example, if you remember Ghostbusters with this synthetic speech.
Yes,
there
was some of the first digital speech that we had in video games, and it was very, very poor. And on the spectrum, it was almost impossible to understand what was being said.
Yeah.
You could still make it out. You could still make it out on the Commodore 64. It would go, "He slimed me."
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
The spectrum was more like, and you had no clue what it was that was being said.
Yeah. And Forrest Moser, who invented that speech synthesis, he's turning 90 this year.
90! Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You see, this is the thing that. The generation that first grew up making these video games, they're not going to be with us much longer. I mean, Mike Singleton, who made Laws of Midnight, sadly passed away a couple of years ago, and I think we should do what we can to pay tribute to these classic video games while the people who made them are still alive, if we can. It's an important part of the way that any medium survives, is to honour the people who went before us, and I hope we never lose sight of that.
Yeah, right.
I should probably leave it there.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you, and we'll speak again soon, Joerg.
Okay. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.
So that was I'm back. So that was Chris Bateman.
Right.
You should check out Silk. It's on Kickstarter right now. It's www.kickstarter.com/project/ihobogames/silk-1, and there's going to be links to everything that we talked about in the podcast description on our own page, sceneworld.org. So you already know where to find us because you're listening to us. So until next time, we'll see you.